Us for over 700 days, I believed the lie. My daughter-in-law Vanessa told me my son Nash was building an oil empire in Dubai. She drove a Porsche and lived in the mansion I paid for while I ate instant noodles in a studio apartment. Then one rainy Tuesday morning at the farmer's market, a delivery driver named Mitch handed me a package that shattered my world. He looked at me with pity in his eyes and said, "Are you Nash's father? This is yours now. Just open it alone." What I found inside that box made my blood boil and started a war that would end with one of us in handcuffs. Before I tell you what was in that package, let me know where you are tuning in from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you believe parents deserve respect after a lifetime of sacrifice. It was a crisp morning in the outskirts of Chicago, and the farmer's market was bustling with people buying organic kale and artisanal cheeses. I stood in front of the fruit stall staring at the price tag of Honeycrisp apples. $3.99 a pound. I checked the crumpled $5 bill in my pocket. It was my lunch money for the next 2 days. But Vanessa had called me yesterday, saying Nash is working too hard. "In the heat, Dad, he is worried about your health. Please eat more fruit." So I picked 3 small apples. I told myself it was worth it. If my son was conquering the world, the least I could do was stay healthy enough to see him when he returned. My name is Bernard Bernie Kowalski. I am 72 years old and a retired steel mill foreman. I used to have a savings account with 6 zeros. I used to own a 4-bedroom house. Now I was arguing with myself over apple prices because I had signed everything over to Nash and Vanessa 2 years ago. They needed capital for the Dubai project, they said. "It is an investment," Dad, Vanessa had purred. "We will double your money in 6 months." 2 years later, I was still waiting for a single dime while Vanessa posted photos of her new designer bags online. I was handing the cashier my crumpled bill when a brown UPS truck screeched to a halt right next to the stalls. The driver jumped out. It was Mitch. I knew Mitch. I had hired his father at the mill 30 years ago. He was a good kid, always respectful. But today he looked pale. He spotted me and froze. He was holding a small package wrapped in brown paper that looked like it had been kicked across a warehouse floor. It was taped up with cheap duct tape and stained with something dark. He walked toward me, ignoring the line of customers. "Mr. Kowalski," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I did not want to leave this at the mansion. I saw you walking here, and I thought it would be better if you got it directly." I wiped my hands on my worn-out trousers and took the box. It was light. Too light. "Why did you not leave it at the house, Mitch?" I asked, confused. "Vanessa usually handles the mail." Mitch looked around nervously, as if he was afraid someone was watching. "Because of the return address, sir," he said. I looked down at the label. My heart stopped beating for a second. The name on the package was Nash Kowalski, but the address was not a skyscraper in the Middle East. It read, "Inmate number 7840, Cook County Correctional Facility." Mitch put a hand on my shoulder and squeezed. "I think you should open that in your truck, sir. And I think you should sit down." My knees almost gave out as I climbed into the cab of my rusted Ford pickup. The smell of old oil and stale coffee usually comforted me, but today the air felt suffocating. I placed the cardboard box on the cracked leather of the passenger seat. It sat there like a bomb waiting to detonate. My hands, usually steady from 40 years of handling molten steel and heavy machinery, trembled so violently I dropped my keys twice before I managed to slice through the cheap duct tape sealing the flaps. I peeled back the cardboard. There was no bubble wrap or professional packaging, just wads of dirty newspaper used as padding. I reached in and pulled out the first object. It was a smartphone, or at least it used to be. The screen was shattered into a spiderweb of glass shards, and the aluminum casing was bent at a sharp angle that suggested it had been stomped on by a heavy boot. This was not the sleek device of a wealthy oil executive living in luxury. This was the debris of a struggle, I pressed the power button hoping for a sign of life, but the screen remained dead black. Beneath the phone lay a small black leather notebook. The cover was worn down to the suede at the corners, peeling away as if someone had clutched it nervously for hours on end. But what made my stomach turn was the dark, crusty stain smeared across the bottom edge. I knew that color. I had seen it enough times in the mill when a worker got careless with a sharp edge. It was dried blood. My breath caught in my throat as I traced the stain with my thumb. I opened the book randomly. The handwriting was unmistakably Nash's, but it was not the confident flowing script of the son I raised. It was jagged, frantic, the letters digging deep into the paper, as if written in the dark or under duress. Pages were filled with numbers, incoherent drawings of a window, with bars and lists of medication. My heart hammered against my ribs as I flipped to the very last written page. The date was from 3 weeks ago. I read the words out loud, my voice cracking in the silence of the truck. Day 730. Vanessa came today. She told me Dad finally passed away from a heart attack last night. She said he died alone and ashamed of me. She said there is nobody left to pay for my therapy, so I am being moved to the lower ward. If Dad is gone, I have no reason to keep fighting. I have no reason to try to walk again. The world tilted on its axis. A primal sound escaped my throat, half sob and half growl. She had not just stolen my money. She had stolen my existence. She had told my son I was dead to break his spirit, while telling me he was too busy to call. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, my face pale and eyes wide with horror. I was very much alive, but the man who had blindly trusted his family died in that truck cab at that exact moment. Tears blurred my vision, but through the mist I saw the dashboard clock. It was time to pay Vanessa a visit. I threw the truck into gear and slammed my foot onto the gas pedal. The old engine roared in protest, a guttural sound that matched the scream building in my own chest. I did not care about the speed limits or the red light I ran at the intersection of Main and 4th. My vision was tunneled, focused entirely on the destination that was supposed to be my son's legacy, but had become the headquarters of a thief. Every mile that passed fueled my rage. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, imagining Vanessa sitting in the lap of luxury, while Nash rotted in a cell, thinking his own father was dead. The drive that usually took 30 minutes took me 15. I screeched into the circular driveway of the colonial estate at 42 Oakwood Drive. The house was magnificent, a sprawling structure of red brick and white pillars that I had liquidated my retirement fund to purchase. Parked in the driveway were 3 Mercedes and a Range Rover gleaming under the afternoon sun. My rusted, dented Ford pickup looked like a garbage truck parked in a showroom. I did not care. I parked diagonally, blocking 2 of the luxury cars, and jumped out. My boots, heavy with mud from the market, crunched loudly on the pristine gravel. I marched to the front door. I did not bother ringing the bell. I knew they would not answer if they saw me on the camera. Instead, I kicked the heavy oak door right below the lock. It held firm. I kicked it again, harder, putting all my 72 years of frustration behind it. But then I remembered the spare key hidden inside the false rock in the planter, a trick I had taught Nash for emergencies. I scrambled through the dirt, found the plastic rock, and jammed the key into the lock. The door swung open. The air inside smelled of expensive lavender and fresh pastries. It was sickeningly sweet. I followed the sound of polite laughter and clinking silverware to the sunroom at the back of the house. I stopped in the archway, breathing heavy, my chest heaving. The scene before me was like something out of a magazine. Vanessa was hosting a high tea. 10 women sat around a long table draped in white linen, dressed in pastel colors, wearing pearls, and holding delicate porcelain cups. There were 3 tier trays filled with cucumber sandwiches and macarons. Vanessa sat at the head of the table like a queen. She was wearing a cream-colored silk dress that probably cost more than my truck. She looked radiant, happy, and completely unburdened by conscience. She was in the middle of a story, her hand gesturing gracefully. Then she saw me. The room went dead silent. The laughter died in their throats. All heads turned to look at the intruder. I must have looked like a madman to them. My flannel shirt was stained with sweat, my hair was disheveled, and my eyes were wild. I stood there a ghost of the working class invading their ivory tower. Vanessa did not look scared. She looked annoyed. She set her cup down slowly and sighed as if I were a naughty dog that had wandered onto the carpet. "Dad," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. "You are embarrassing yourself. We are having a committee meeting." I did not say a word. I marched across the room, my dirty boots leaving distinct muddy prints on the expensive Persian rug. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the black, blood-stained notebook. I did not hand it to her. I threw it. I hurled it with every ounce of strength I had left. The heavy book spun through the air and slammed onto the center of the table. It collided with a silver teapot and a stack of fine china. The crash was deafening. A delicate floral teacup shattered, sending shards of porcelain flying. Hot tea splashed across the pristine white tablecloth, spreading like a dark stain. The women gasped and jumped back, clutching their pearls. The notebook slid across the wet linen and stopped right in front of Vanessa. The bloodstain on the cover seemed to pulse against the white fabric. I pointed a shaking finger at her face, and for the first time in years, I let the anger take over. "Tell them," I roared. "Tell them where you really sent my son." I expected her to scream or call the police, but Vanessa did something far more terrifying. She remained perfectly calm. She slowly picked up a linen napkin and dabbed at the tea stain on her silk dress, as if I had merely spilled a drop of water instead of accusing her of a felony. She looked at her friends with eyes full of practiced sorrow and let out a long, shaky sigh. "I am so sorry, ladies," she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to sound heartbroken. "My father-in-law has been struggling with aggressive dementia for months now. He gets confused about reality and invents these terrible stories." The women at the table let out a collective gasp of sympathy. Their looks of shock turned instantly to pity and disgust. I felt the room shrinking around me. "I do not have dementia," I roared, my hands balling into fists. "I know what I saw, Vanessa. That package came from a prison cell. Nash is not in Dubai." Vanessa stood up and walked toward me slowly, with her palms raised like she was approaching a wild animal. "Dad, please stop," she said softly. "You are having an episode. You need to take your medication. There is no prison. Nash calls you every week." Do you not remember? She was rewriting reality right in front of me. The gaslighting was so smooth and so confident that for a split second I felt a crack in my own mind. Did I miss a call? Was I confused? No. I touched the pocket where the shattered phone lay. I knew the truth. "Call him," I challenged her. "If he is in Dubai, call him right now on video." Vanessa did not hesitate. She pulled her brand-new phone from her pocket and tapped the screen. "Let us put your mind at ease, Dad," she said. She held the phone up so the entire room could see. The screen flickered and a face appeared. It was Nash. He was wearing a suit and sitting in what looked like a high-rise office with a blurred city skyline behind him. But something was wrong. His skin looked too smooth, and his eyes did not blink quite enough. "Nash, are you there?" Vanessa asked sweetly. "Your father is here and he is very upset. He thinks you are in prison." The figure on the screen moved. The mouth opened, but the audio was out of sync by a fraction of a second. "Dad," the voice said. It sounded like Nash, but stripped of all warmth, a metallic, hollow imitation. "Why are you doing this again? I am in a meeting in Dubai. Vanessa is taking good care of you. Please go home and rest. You are embarrassing the family." The connection cut off abruptly before I could say a word. "See," Vanessa said, turning the phone off. "He is fine. He is working hard for us. Now please, Dad, let me call a cab to take you home before you hurt yourself." The women at the table were murmuring. "Poor thing," one of them said. "He looks so lucid, but his mind is completely gone." I stood there frozen. I knew what I had just seen. It was a deepfake, a digital puppet show. The glitch in the audio and the dead look in his eyes gave it away. But in this room full of wealthy strangers, I was the crazy old man, and Vanessa was the saintly daughter-in-law. My heart pounded against my ribs like a trapped bird. She had not just stolen my money and my son. She was trying to steal my sanity. I looked at her smug face one last time and realized that arguing would only dig my grave deeper. I needed to leave. I needed to regroup. And I needed to find out where that signal really came from. Two burly security guards in dark suits did not give me the dignity of walking out on my own. They hoisted me up by my armpits as if I were an unruly drunk at a dive bar, rather than a 72-year-old man in the home he paid for. One of them twisted my arm behind my back, sending a sharp jolt of pain through my arthritic shoulder, while the other shoved me toward the front entrance. I stumbled, but they did not let up. They marched me past the manicured hedges and the marble fountain I had installed for Vanessa 3 years ago. "Get off the property, old man," the taller guard growled, his grip tightening on my bicep. "If we see you here again, we are calling the cops and having you thrown in the drunk tank." They tossed me onto the asphalt outside the main iron gates like a bag of unwanted trash. I landed hard on my hands and knees, scraping the skin off my palms. The heavy metal gates slammed shut with a finality that echoed in my bones. I looked up to see the surveillance camera blinking red above the keypad. Vanessa was probably watching from the safety of her sunroom, sipping fresh tea and laughing with her friends about her crazy father-in-law. I picked myself up and dusted the gravel off my trousers. My body ached, but the pain in my mind was far worse. I climbed into my truck and locked the doors, but I did not start the engine immediately. I sat there in the deepening twilight, staring at my trembling hands. The silence in the cab was suffocating. For the first time that day, doubt began to creep in like a cold fog. Maybe she was right. The thought whispered in my ear. Maybe I am losing it. That video call looked so real. Nash looked healthy. He sounded like himself, even if the words were cold. What if Mitch, the delivery driver, was the one playing a prank? What if I am just a lonely old man projecting his insecurities onto a successful daughter-in-law? I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked old. I looked tired. I looked like a man who could easily be confused by technology and grief. But then my eyes drifted back to the passenger seat. The shattered phone and the leather notebook sat there in the fading light. I reached out and touched the dried blood on the cover of the diary. It was rough and real. Digital screens can be faked. Voices can be synthesized. I had seen enough sci-fi movies to know that. But blood does not lie. A smashed phone sent from a prison address is not a hallucination. I realized then that going home was not an option. If I went back to my empty apartment, I would just sit there and let Vanessa win. I would let the doubt eat me alive until I really did go crazy. I clenched my jaw so hard my teeth hurt. I was not going to be the victim in her narrative. I was a father, and my son was in trouble. I turned the key in the ignition, and the old Ford roared to life. I was not going back to eat instant noodles and wait for the next allowance check that would never come. I put the truck in gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving the mansion and the lies behind me. The sun was setting, but for me, the day was just beginning. I had a phone to fix and a truth to dig up. I drove toward the city lights, determined to find out exactly what kind of hell my son was living in. I sat in the cab of my truck, parked in the shadow of a construction site that looked like the skeleton of a giant beast. My stomach growled a low rumble that echoed the emptiness inside my chest. I reached into the plastic grocery bag on the passenger seat and pulled out a styrofoam cup of instant noodles, shrimp flavor. It cost 99 cents. I had filled it with hot water at a gas station down the road, and now the steam was fogging up my glasses. I peeled back the foil lid, and the smell of artificial spices filled the small space. It was a far cry from the Sunday roasts Martha used to make, but it was all I could afford. As I swirled the plastic fork in the salty broth, my mind drifted back 2 years. I was not sitting in a rusted truck then. I was sitting at the mahogany dining table of the house on Maple Street. The house I had built with my own hands. The house where Nash took his first steps and where Martha took her last breath. I remembered the smell of fresh ink and expensive champagne. Nash was sitting across from me. He looked so young, then so full of hope. Or maybe it was fear. I slid a check across the polished wood. $500,000. It was everything. It was the sale of the house. It was my pension lump sum. It was the life insurance payout from Martha's death. I remembered my hand trembling as I let go of the paper. "Dad, are you sure?" Nash had asked. His voice was soft. He looked at the check and then at me, and for a second I saw hesitation in his eyes. Before I could answer, Vanessa placed her hand over his. "Of course he is sure, Nash," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Your father believes in you. He knows this is not a gift. It is an investment. We are going to turn this into $5 million in 3 years. Think of the life we will give him. He will never have to worry about a bill again." I looked at her and smiled like a fool. I trusted her. I trusted the way she looked at my son. I said, "Take it, son. Make your mother proud. Build that empire in Dubai. I do not need a big house anymore. I just need to know you are set for life." I watched them drive away that day in a brand new convertible, laughing as they turned the corner. I stood on the porch of a house that was no longer mine, holding a single suitcase of clothes. I felt lighter then. I felt like a good father. I thought I was planting seeds for a forest that would shelter us all. I took a bite of the noodles. They were lukewarm and tasted like salt and regret. The memory turned bitter in my mouth. I was not a good father. I was a mark, a victim. I had handed them the weapon they used to destroy me. I gave them the money they used to lock my son away and finance their betrayal. Vanessa did not use that money to build an empire. She used it to build a cage. I looked down at the dashboard. The fuel gauge was hovering near empty, just like my bank account. But as I swallowed the last of the cheap noodles, a fire ignited in my gut that had nothing to do with hunger. I had lost the house on Maple Street. I had lost the retirement fund. But I still had the truck. I still had my 2 hands. And I had a memory of Nash's hesitation that day at the table. He had wanted to warn me, I was sure of it now. Vanessa had stopped him. I crushed the empty styrofoam cup in my fist until it cracked. I tossed it into the footwell. I was done mourning the past. The Bernard who signed that check was dead. The Bernard sitting in this truck was going to get every single cent back, or burn their fake kingdom to the ground trying. I parked the truck 3 houses down under the shade of an old oak tree where I knew the branches would hide my windshield from the glare. I sat there for hours, watching the house that used to be our family sanctuary, but was now just a monument to her greed. It was midday, and the sun was reflecting off the manicured lawn, making the white pillars of the porch gleam with a brilliance that felt insulting. A delivery van pulled up first, but it was not bringing medical supplies for a sick husband or groceries for a grieving wife. It was delivering high-end fashion. I watched from behind my sunglasses as Vanessa pranced out to meet the driver. She signed for the packages with a flourish, laughing at something the driver said. I could see the logos from 50 yards away. Saks Fifth Avenue, Neiman Marcus. She was draped in silk and dripping in diamonds that were bought with the money meant to save my son's life. Each bag she carried inside represented a month of physical therapy Nash was not getting. Each designer shoebox was a week of proper nutrition he was being denied while he rotted in that facility. But the shopping spree was not the worst part. An hour later, the garage door rolled up with a mechanical hum. I expected to see her organizing the clutter, but instead, she began a purge. She came out carrying armfuls of clothes. I recognized them instantly. They were Nash suits, the navy blue one he wore to his graduation, the gray tweed jacket I bought him when he got his first promotion. She did not donate them to charity. She did not pack them away with care. She stuffed them into heavy-duty black trash bags and tossed them onto the curb like they were infected. She was erasing him. She was scrubbing every trace of my son from his own home as if he had never existed. Then came the moment that made me grip the steering wheel until my knuckles cracked. She went back into the garage and began wrestling with something heavy. It was Nash's electric wheelchair. I remembered the day we bought it. It cost $8,000. It was top of the line, designed to give him independence if he ever recovered enough to sit up. It was his hope. Vanessa dragged it across the concrete, the metal scraping with a sound that tore through my heart. She did not care that she was scratching the paint or damaging the motor. She shoved it right next to the trash bags. It sat there, crooked and abandoned, a symbol of his mobility, treated like garbage. I wondered why she was clearing so much space. The answer arrived 10 minutes later. A flatbed truck turned onto the street carrying a bright red convertible sports car. It was a Porsche. The chrome shined so bright it hurt my eyes. Vanessa clapped her hands and jumped up and down like a teenager. The driver unloaded the beast, and she wasted no time driving it into the spot where Nash's wheelchair had sat just moments before. She had literally thrown away his legs to make room for her new toy. I watched her caress the leather steering wheel with a look of pure adoration she had never shown my son. That was the final piece of the puzzle. There was no grieving wife here. There was only a parasite who had finally consumed enough of its host to shed its skin and reveal the monster underneath. I started my engine quietly. I had seen enough. The time for watching was over. Night fell like a heavy shroud over the suburbs, turning the manicured lawns and stately oaks into ominous shadows. I sat in my truck with the engine off, shivering slightly as the temperature dropped. My stomach was empty, but my eyes were wide open, burning with a caffeine-fueled intensity. I had been watching the house for 6 hours. The lights inside were blazing a beacon of warmth and wealth that I was barred from entering. I was just about to start the truck to run the heater for a minute when a pair of blinding xenon headlights swept across my windshield. A low growl echoed through the quiet street as a silver Jaguar F-Type pulled into the driveway. It moved with the predatory grace of a shark, gliding right past the spot where my son's wheelchair used to sit. The driver killed the engine and stepped out. He was tall, with slicked back hair and a suit that shimmered even in the moonlight. I squinted, trying to make out his face. He looked familiar, but I could not place him immediately. He walked toward the front door, not with the hesitation of a guest, but with the swagger of an owner. I watched, waiting for him to ring the doorbell. He did not. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a key. The sight of that small piece of metal felt like a physical blow to my gut. That was my house. The locks were changed to keep me out, but this stranger, this man driving a car worth more than my life earnings, waltzed right in as if he paid the mortgage. I slipped out of my truck, keeping to the shadows of the hedges. I needed to see. I needed to know who was replacing my son. I crept through the rhododendrons, the branches scratching my face, until I had a clear view of the large bay window of the living room. The curtains were drawn, but there was a gap just wide enough for me to see inside. Vanessa was there waiting. She had changed out of her shopping clothes into a silk robe that left little to the imagination. As the man entered, she did not offer him a handshake or a polite greeting. She threw her arms around his neck and kissed him. It was not a friendly peck. It was a passionate, possessive kiss. She laughed, throwing her head back, and handed him a glass of amber liquid. The man turned, and the light from the chandelier hit his face clearly. My blood ran cold. It was the man from the bank paperwork. Gavin Stone, the notary public. The so-called financial advisor who had supposedly witnessed Nash signing away his rights. He was not just an accomplice. He was the reason. I watched them toast, clinking their crystal glasses together, while my son lay in a bed of filth 10 miles away. They were celebrating their victory, dancing on the grave of a man who was not even dead yet. The betrayal was absolute. I felt a roar building in my throat, a sound so primal it frightened even me. I could not stay in the shadows any longer. I had to look them in the eye. The rage inside me was a physical thing, a burning coal in the center of my chest that made it hard to breathe. I crouched in the wet mulch behind the rhododendrons, my hands shaking violently as I fumbled for my phone. It was an old model with a scratched lens, but it was the only weapon I had. Through the gap in the heavy velvet curtains, I could see them clearly. Vanessa was laughing, her head thrown back, exposing her long neck, while Gavin whispered something in her ear. His hand slid down her back with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. This was not a business meeting. This was a celebration of their theft. I raised the phone, trying to steady my trembling arms to frame the shot. I needed proof. I needed a judge to see that the grieving wife was actually hosting her lover in the house my son paid for. I held my breath and pressed the shutter button. In my haste, I forgot to turn off the flash. A burst of white light exploded against the window pane, illuminating the dark garden for a split second, like a bolt of lightning. Inside the house, the laughter stopped instantly. Vanessa screamed and pulled her silk robe tighter around herself. Gavin did not flinch. He looked straight at the window, his eyes locking onto the darkness where I hid. He said something short and sharp to Vanessa, then turned and strode toward the front door with terrifying purpose. I scrambled backward, my boots slipping on the slick grass. I tried to run toward my truck, but my bad knee buckled, and I fell hard onto the damp lawn. Before I could scramble to my feet, the front door swung open, and light flooded the driveway. Gavin stepped out. He did not look angry. He looked amused. He walked down the porch steps, slowly adjusting the cuffs of his expensive suit, as if he were walking down a runway instead of confronting a trespasser. He stopped a few feet away from me, looking down with a sneer that twisted his handsome face into something ugly. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice smooth and dripping with condensation. "If it is not the former owner. You know, Bernard, for a man who claims to be destitute, you certainly have a lot of free time to play spy." I struggled to stand up, wiping mud from my flannel shirt. I faced him, my heart pounding in my ears. "I know who you are," I spat out. "You are the notary. You are the one who forged the documents. You are sleeping with my son's wife while he rots in a cell." Gavin laughed, a low, dry sound that chilled my blood. "Notary is such a limited title, Bernard," he said, taking a step closer, invading my personal space. "I prefer the term financial architect, or perhaps future master of the house. You see, Vanessa needed someone with vision, someone who understood that millions of dollars should not be wasted on a vegetable like your son." He reached out and dusted an imaginary speck of dirt off his lapel, staring at me with dead shark eyes. "Let us be honest, old man. Nash was never going to amount to anything. We just accelerated the inevitable. I am doing you a favor, really. I am managing the fortune you were too stupid to enjoy. Now get in that piece of junk you call a truck and drive away. If I catch you peeping in my windows again, I will not call the police. I will call the mental ward and have you committed for senile dementia. Do not test me, Bernard. You have already lost." He turned his back on me and walked calmly back into the house, whistling a cheerful tune. The heavy door clicked shut, and the lock turned with a finality that echoed in the night. I stood there alone in the dark, my fists clenched at my sides. He thought he had crushed me. He thought his arrogance was a shield. But he was wrong. By revealing his face and his pride, he had just given me exactly what I needed: a target. I did not expect the violence. In my mind, Gavin was a white-collar criminal, a coward who hid behind fountain pens and forged signatures. I was wrong. When I mentioned the word prison, his veneer of sophistication cracked instantly. He did not argue. He stepped forward and shoved me. It was not a warning push. It was a strike delivered with the full weight of a man half my age who spent his free time in a boxing gym. My bad knee buckled under the force. I stumbled backward, my boots losing traction on the dew-slicked pavement. The world spun. I felt the hard edge of the concrete porch steps slam into my lower back, followed immediately by the sickening crack of my head hitting the stone planter. A flash of white light exploded behind my eyes. For a moment I just lay there, stunned, gasping for air, as the cold dampness of the ground seeped into my flannel shirt. I reached up to touch my forehead. My hand came away wet and warm. Blood. It trickled down my temple, stinging my eye and blurring my vision. I groaned, trying to push myself up, but my body refused to cooperate. The pain in my hip was a sharp, hot knife twisting with every breath. Then I heard the clicking of heels. Fast, angry steps coming from the open doorway. Vanessa. For a split second, a foolish part of my heart thought she was rushing to help me. I thought that seeing the man who raised her husband bleeding on the ground might spark some dormant shred of humanity in her. Vanessa stopped right next to me. I looked up through my one good eye, waiting for a hand to reach down. Instead, she stepped over my legs as if I were a fallen tree branch. She rushed straight to Gavin, grabbing his hands and inspecting his suit jacket. "Oh my God, Gavin, are you hurt?" she cried, her voice full of frantic concern. "Did he touch you? Look at your shoes. There is mud all over your Italian leather." I lay there paralyzed by the sheer cruelty of it. She was wiping a speck of dirt from her lover's shoe while her father-in-law bled at her feet. Gavin chuckled, brushing her off. "I am fine, babe. Just taking out the trash." Vanessa turned to me then. The look on her face was not anger. It was disgust. Pure, unadulterated loathing. She stood on the porch looking down at me like a queen passing judgment on a peasant. "Get up," she hissed. "Get up and get off my property before you bleed on the driveway. We just had it pressure washed." I struggled to my elbows, fighting the nausea. "This is my house, Vanessa," I rasped, spitting out the metallic taste of blood. "I bought every brick." "Not anymore," she said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm register. "According to the deed on file, this house belongs to the trust. And as the trustee, I am telling you that you are trespassing. You have exactly 1 minute to crawl back to that rust bucket truck and leave." She pulled her phone from her robe pocket and held it up, the screen glowing in the darkness. "If you are still here in 60 seconds, I am calling the police. I will tell them an unstable intruder attacked us. I have the bruise on Gavin's hand to prove it. And with your history of emotional outbursts at the bank today, who do you think they will believe? The grieving wife or the senile old man?" I looked at her, at the woman my son loved, at the woman I had welcomed as a daughter. There was no soul behind those eyes, only calculation. She was ready to send me to jail just as easily as she had sent Nash to that hellhole. I gritted my teeth and forced my broken body to move. I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me arrested. I dragged myself up using the truck bumper for support, my head throbbing with every heartbeat. I did not say another word. There were no words left for monsters. I climbed into the cab, wiping the blood from my eyes so I could see the road. As I reversed out of the driveway, I saw them standing there together, arm in arm, watching me leave. They thought they had won. They thought they had broken me. But all they had done was remove the last of my mercy. I drove into the night, leaving a trail of blood on the seat, but my mind was clearer than it had ever been. War had been declared, and I was done playing by the rules. I drove until the manicured lawns of the suburbs turned into the cracked pavement of the industrial district. I was looking for a place that asked no questions and accepted cash. I found it wedged between a liquor store and a pawn shop, a place with a flickering neon sign that just said, "Repairs." The air inside smelled of burning solder and cheap cigarettes. The kid behind the counter that could not have been more than 20, with a neck tattoo and eyes that had seen too much. I placed the shattered remains of Nash's phone on the glass counter. "Can you retrieve the data?" I asked, my voice raspy from the pain in my head. The kid whistled low. Man, this was not dropped. This was stomped on. He looked at my bruised face and the dried blood on my flannel shirt, but he did not ask who did it. He just asked for $50. I handed him the last bills in my wallet, money I had saved for groceries. He plugged the device into a mess of wires and started typing. I sat on a wobbly plastic stool, counting the seconds, praying that the only link to my son had not been destroyed by Vanessa's heel. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The silence was broken only by the hum of his computer fans. Suddenly, the kid stopped typing. "The motherboard is fried," he said, and my heart sank. But he continued. "I managed to pull one cache file. It looks like an unsent voice memo. Do you want to hear it?" I nodded, unable to speak. He pressed a key. Static filled the small room, followed by a sound that brought me to my knees. It was Nash. His voice was weak, slurring like he was drugged. "Dad," he whispered through the speakers. "Dad, help me." "She put me in the..." The audio cut out for a second, replaced by a loud metallic screeching noise. Then in the background, clear as a bell, came a voice over a PA system. "Dr. Alcott to Wing B. Dr. Alcott to Wing B immediately. Sunnyvale needs assistance in the rec room." The recording ended. The kid looked at me. Sunnyvale. Ain't that the place down by the old rail yard? The place they shut down twice for health violations. I grabbed the counter to steady myself. Sunnyvale. It was not a rehabilitation center. It was a warehouse for the forgotten, a place where people went to die when their families wanted to save money. Vanessa had not sent him to a hospital. She had thrown him into a garbage bin for humans. I grabbed the flash drive the kid offered. I did not feel the pain in my head anymore. All I felt was a cold, deadly direction. I knew where my son was, and God help anyone who stood in my way. The GPS on my phone led me away from the glowing skyline of the city and into the industrial wasteland that bordered the river. The smooth asphalt turned into cracked concrete, riddled with potholes that shook my old truck to its bones. I drove past abandoned factories with broken windows and scrapyards guarded by chaining dogs. The air here didn't smell like rain anymore. It smelled of sulfur and burning rubber. This was the part of the world polite society pretended didn't exist, the dumping ground for everything broken and unwanted. I turned a corner past a chemical plant and saw it. Sunnyvale Care Center. The name was a cruel joke painted on a wooden sign that was rotting away at the edges. The building itself was a squat gray concrete block that looked more like a medium-security prison than a place of healing. There were no gardens. There were no trees. Just a parking lot filled with weeds and a dumpster that was overflowing with medical waste. A stray cat picked at a discarded food tray near the entrance. My heart hammered against my ribs as I parked the truck. I sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel, terrified of what I was about to see. I had nightmares about losing my son, but the reality looming in front of me felt far worse. I stepped out, and the wind hit me, carrying the stench of the nearby sewage treatment plant. I limped toward the automatic doors, which shuddered and groaned as they slid open. The smell inside hit me like a physical blow. It was a thick, suffocating cocktail of industrial bleach, stale urine, and boiled cabbage. It was the smell of neglect. I gagged, covering my mouth with my hand. The lobby was dim, lit by fluorescent tubes that flickered with a maddening buzz. The linoleum floor was scuffed and yellowed with age, sticky under my boots. There was no receptionist at the front desk, just a glass partition smeared with fingerprints and a sign that said, "Visiting hours end at 5. It was 7. I walked past the desk into the main hallway. The walls were painted a depressing shade of beige that was peeling away in long strips to reveal the damp concrete underneath. From the rooms lining the corridor, I heard sounds that will haunt me until the day I die. The low, rhythmic moaning of someone in pain. A hacking cough that sounded like it was tearing a chest apart. A shriek of laughter from a television turned up too loud in an empty room. I peered into an open door. An elderly woman lay curled in a fetal position on a mattress that looked too thin to offer any comfort. Her sheets were gray and tangled. There was no water pitcher on her table, no flowers, just the harsh glare of the hallway light spilling onto her face. This was a warehouse for the living dead, a place where families sent their burdens to be forgotten. And somewhere in this labyrinth of misery was my son, my Nash, the boy who had graduated with honors, the man who had dreamed of building skyscrapers. Vanessa had not just stolen his money, she had stolen his dignity. She had thrown him into this pit to rot while she drank champagne in the house he paid for. I felt tears burning my eyes, not from sadness, but from a rage so pure it felt like it could burn this entire building to the ground. I wiped my face, ignored the throbbing in my head, and started walking deeper into the gloom. I was not leaving without him. The woman behind the bulletproof glass partition did not even look up when I tapped on the scratched surface. She was engrossed in a magazine and chewing gum with a slow, rhythmic indifference that made my blood pressure spike. Her name tag hung crookedly on her uniform and read, Brenda. I tapped again, harder this time, using the heavy brass ring on my finger to make a sharp clacking sound. She finally sighed, rolling her eyes as if I were interrupting something important, and slid the glass panel open just an inch. "Can I help you?" she asked in a tone that clearly implied she hoped the answer was no. "I am here to see Nash Kowalski," I said, my voice raspy. "I am his father." Brenda began typing on her keyboard with agonizing slowness. Her long acrylic nails clicked against the keys like hail on a tin roof. She squinted at the monitor, then stopped. Her expression shifted from boredom to suspicion. She looked at me, then back at the screen, then back at me. "I am sorry, sir," she said, sliding the glass panel shut a little further. "Patient in room 104 is on a restricted list. No visitors allowed." I felt a cold sweat break out on my back. Restricted list. "What are you talking about?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. "I am his father. I have the right to see him." Brenda shook her head. "Not according to this file. The legal guardian, Mrs. Vanessa Kowalski, has flagged this patient as highly volatile and a danger to himself and others. The notes say he has a history of violent outbursts and delusions. We have a strict no-contact order to prevent agitation. If you are not on the approved list, you do not get past these double doors." Violent. The word hung in the air like a poisonous gas. My son was a gentle soul who built model bridges in his spare time. He had never raised a hand against anyone in his life. And now, according to that voice recording, he was likely bedridden and sedated. Vanessa had not just locked him away, she had painted him as a monster to ensure no one would try to save him. I pressed my face against the glass, ignoring the throbbing pain in my forehead. "Listen to me, Brenda," I pleaded, my pride vanishing. "My son is not violent. He is sick. He is being held here against his will. Please just let me look at him for 5 minutes. I just need to know he is alive." Brenda picked up the phone on her desk. "Sir, you need to leave now or I am calling the police. We have zero tolerance for aggressive behavior here." I looked at her hand hovering over the keypad. I looked at the heavy steel doors behind her that separated me from my boy. I knew that arguing with her was useless. She was just a cog in the machine that Vanessa had paid for. If the police came, I would be arrested for trespassing and Nash would be moved to an even deeper hole. "I understand," I said, backing away with my hands raised in surrender. "I am leaving. Do not call the cops." I turned and walked toward the exit, my footsteps heavy on the sticky linoleum. But I did not leave. As soon as I was out of Brenda's line of sight, I ducked into a narrow hallway marked "Employees Only." I saw a young orderly pushing a cart of dirty laundry through a set of swinging doors at the far end. He looked tired and distracted. I waited until the doors swung shut behind him, then I moved. I was not going home. I was going to break into room 104 even if I had to tear the walls down with my bare hands. I slipped through the delivery entrance while the kitchen staff was on a smoke break. The loading dock door was propped open with a broken brick, a clear violation of safety protocols, but I was not there to inspect the building codes. I was there to save my life. The kitchen smelled of burnt grease and rotting cabbage. A large rat scurried behind a stack of cardboard boxes as I stepped over a puddle of gray, stagnant water, leaking from a dishwasher that looked like it had not been cleaned since the 80s. I held my breath and pushed through the swinging double doors into the main corridor. If the lobby was depressing, this hallway was a scene from a nightmare. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered with a maddening buzz, casting long, twitching shadows on the peeling beige walls. The air was thick and humid, heavy with the copper scent of old blood and the sharp, stinging aroma of ammonia and unwashed bodies. It was the smell of misery. I kept my head down, pulling the collar of my flannel shirt up, trying to look like a lost maintenance worker. I passed open doors that revealed the true horror of Sunnyvale. In one room, an elderly woman was tied to her bed rails with torn strips of bedsheet, her arms bruised and thin as twigs. She looked at me with milky, desperate eyes and mouthed the word water, but her voice was gone. In another room, 3 men were crammed into a space meant for one. One of them was half falling off his mattress, his hospital gown stained and soaked, while the call button light above his door blinked a frantic red that no one was coming to answer. There were no nurses at the station. There was just a radio playing pop music at a low volume and a half-eaten sandwich left on a counter. This was not a care facility. It was a warehouse for the discarded, a place where human beings were stacked like inventory until they expired so the state would stop sending checks. My hands shook with a rage so potent it almost blinded me. Vanessa had taken my life savings. She had taken the money meant for the best specialists in the country and used it to buy sports cars while she threw her husband into this pit of hell. I followed the scuffed numbers on the wall, moving deeper into the facility toward the east wing. The further I went, the darker and colder it got. The floor tiles here were cracked, revealing the damp concrete foundation underneath. Water damage stained the ceiling tiles in ugly brown patches that looked like bruises. Finally, I reached the end of the hallway. It was a dead end isolated from the rest of the ward. There was only one door here. The plastic numbers 10 and 4 were peeling off the wood hanging by a strip of dried glue. A heavy padlock hasp had been installed on the outside of the door, though it was currently unlocked. Why would a patient need to be locked in from the outside? I stood there for a moment, my hand hovering over the cold metal knob. I was terrified of what I would find on the other side. I was afraid that the sun I remembered was gone forever, replaced by a broken shell. But I took a deep breath of the foul air, gripped the handle, and turned it. The hinges screamed in the silence as I pushed the door open to face my destiny. The room was bathed in shadows, illuminated only by the sickly orange glow of a streetlight filtering through a dirty window pane. My eyes took a moment to adjust to the gloom, but when they did, the air left my lungs in a sharp, agonizing gasp. The man in the bed was not the son I remembered. The Nash I knew was broad-shouldered and filled with vitality, a man who filled a room with his presence. The figure lying before me was a skeleton wrapped in translucent gray skin. His cheekbones protruded sharply beneath hollow eyes that stared blankly at the ceiling, and his arms were no thicker than the railing of the bed he was trapped in. I took a step forward, my boots heavy on the sticky floor. The sound made him flinch. He turned his head slowly, a movement that seemed to cost him every ounce of energy he had left. When his eyes locked onto mine, I expected relief. I expected a smile. Instead, I saw pure, unadulterated terror. He recoiled, pressing his fragile body against the filthy wall as if he were trying to disappear. His mouth opened, but his throat was so dry only a raspy croak came out. "No," he whispered, his voice trembling with a fear that broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. "No, not you. Go away. You are dead. She said you are dead." He thought I was a ghost. Vanessa had planted that lie so deep in his mind that seeing me did not bring him hope. It only confirmed to him that he was either losing his mind or that he had finally died and gone to the afterlife. He squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head violently, trying to banish the hallucination. I rushed to the bedside, ignoring the smell of infection and neglect that rose from the sheets. I reached out and wrapped my large calloused hand around his bony fingers. His skin was ice cold and papery dry. I squeezed gently, letting the warmth of my blood transfer to him, letting the roughness of my palm prove that I was flesh and bone. "Nash, look at me," I choked out, fighting back the tears that threatened to blind me. "Open your eyes, son. It is me. It is really me. I am not dead. I am right here." He opened his eyes slowly. He looked at my hand gripping his, then up at my face. He studied the fresh cut on my forehead from where Gavin had pushed me. He saw the dirt on my shirt and the tears streaming down my cheeks. Ghosts do not bleed. Ghosts do not cry. The realization hit him like a physical wave. His lower lip began to quiver uncontrollably. The terror in his eyes melted away, replaced by a pain so raw it was hard to witness. "Dad," he wheezed the word barely audible. "I am here, I promised." Leaning down to press my forehead against his feverish brow. "I am here, and I am never leaving you again." He tried to say something else, but he did not have the strength. Instead, a single tear tracked through the grime on his face, followed by another. He did not sob, he did not have the air for it. He just cried silently, his chest hitching in shallow, rapid breaths as he clung to my hand with a desperate strength I did not know he possessed. In that dark, smelly room holding the broken shell of my only child, I felt the last of my hesitation burn away. I was going to kill the woman who did this. Not with a gun, but with the truth. The heavy door creaked open behind me, and I froze, expecting security guards to burst in and drag me away from my son. I shielded Nash's body with my own, ready to fight. But when I turned around, I saw a young nurse standing there. She was not the rude woman from the front desk. She was small, with tired eyes and a name tag that read Sarah. She looked at me, then at Nash, who was clutching my hand like a lifeline, and her expression softened. She did not reach for the alarm. Instead, she closed the door quietly and locked it from the inside. "You are Bernard," she whispered, walking to the foot of the bed. "He calls for you every night. The administration told us he was delusional. They said his father was dead and that he was just confused by the medication. But I knew. I heard the way he screamed your name in his nightmares." She reached under her arm and pulled out a thick metal clipboard. She glanced at the small window in the door to make sure no one was watching, then handed it to me. "I am going to lose my license for showing you this," she said, her hands trembling slightly. "But you need to know the truth. You need to see why he is not getting better." I took the clipboard, my hands shaking as I flipped through the pages. The first document was a billing statement. My eyes scanned the columns, expecting to see the exorbitant medical costs Vanessa had always complained about. She used to tell me that Nash's care cost $20,000 a month. She said that was why she needed my savings. That was why she needed to sell the house. But the number at the bottom of the invoice was not $20,000. It was $500. $500 a month. I stared at the paper, unable to comprehend the cruelty. It was listed as the basic maintenance package. It was the cheapest option the facility offered, designed for indigent patients with no family. It covered a bed, a shared bathroom, and 2 meals a day. That was it. Vanessa spent more on a single pair of shoes than she spent on keeping her husband alive for an entire month. Look at the treatment plan, Sarah whispered, pointing to a blank chart, or rather, the lack of one. When Nash came here, the doctor ordered aggressive physical therapy and speech pathology. He said Nash had a 90% chance of a full recovery if he started immediately. I looked at the notes. Beside every recommendation for therapy, there was a stamp in red ink that read, "Declined by guardian." She refused everything, Sarah explained, tears welling in her eyes. She said it was a waste of resources. She cut off his pain medication too, saying he did not need it because he was not moving. I felt a bile rise in my throat. I wanted to scream, but the horror was not over. Sarah turned to the very last page of the file. It was a bright pink sheet of paper designed to be seen immediately in an emergency. At the top, in bold black letters, it read, "Do not resuscitate." My heart stopped. Below the legal text was Vanessa's signature. It was dated the very same day she had admitted him. If his heart stops, or if he stops breathing, we are legally forbidden from saving him, Sarah said, a tear finally rolling down her cheek. We have to just stand back and let him go. She did not send him here to recover Mr. Kowalski. She sent him here to die. She has been waiting for a phone call from us for 2 years. I looked from the pink paper to my son, who was watching me with wide, terrified eyes. He knew. He knew that his own wife had signed his death warrant and left him here to wait for the end. The sadness in my heart evaporated, instantly replaced by a cold, hard resolve. Vanessa wanted a death. She wanted an end. I looked at Sarah and handed the clipboard back. She is going to get exactly what she wanted, I said, my voice low and dangerous. But it is not going to be Nash who loses his life. It is going to be her who loses everything. Thank you, Sarah. You just gave me the weapon I needed to destroy her. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to pick him up and run. I wanted to tear the IV drip from his arm, wrap him in my flannel shirt, and carry him out to the truck. I wanted to drive until we were far away from this house of horrors. But I looked at Sarah standing by the door, keeping watch, and I knew I could not. If I took him now without legal authority, Vanessa would call the police. She would paint me as a senile kidnapper endangering a fragile patient. I would end up in a cell, and Nash would be returned to this hellhole with no one left to fight for him. I had to play the long game no matter how much it hurt. I pulled the thin gray blanket up to Nash's chin, trying to cover his shivering shoulders. He flinched again, his eyes darting around the room as if he expected Vanessa to step out of the shadows. I stroked his hair, which was matted and greasy, trying to soothe him. "How did this happen, son?" I whispered. "How did she get you here without a fight? You are twice her size." Nash swallowed hard, his throat clicking dryly. He leaned in closer, his voice barely a breath against my ear. "The trip," he rasped. "We were supposed to go to the airport. She made me a smoothie. Said it was for the jet lag. It tasted bitter. Blue powder." I clenched my jaw so tight my teeth ached. She had drugged him. She had poisoned her own husband on the morning of his supposed big break. I remember falling in the hallway, Nash continued, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes. I could not move my legs. I could not speak. I heard her on the phone. She was laughing, Dad. She was laughing with Gavin. She said the package is ready for delivery. I thought I was dying. I woke up here in the dark. The image of my strong, brilliant son lying paralyzed on his own floor, while his wife laughed with her lover, seared itself into my brain. It was a cruelty so calculated it wasn't human. I gripped his hand tighter. "Listen to me, Nash. I have to leave you here for a little while longer." His eyes widened in panic and he tried to sit up. "No, Dad. Please don't leave me," he begged. "She will come back." I put my hands on his shoulders, holding him steady. "I have to go so I can destroy her, Nash. If I take you now, we lose. But I swear to you on your mother's grave I am coming back. And when I do, I am not sneaking you out the back door. You are going to leave through the front entrance like a king. You are going to watch from a limousine while the police drag her out in handcuffs. I am going to make sure she never hurts you or anyone else ever again. Do you trust me?" He looked at me, searching my face for the father he used to know, the man who could fix anything. Slowly, he nodded and squeezed my hand. "I trust you, Dad." I kissed his forehead one last time, tasting the salt of his sweat. I forced myself to let go. Walking away from that bed was the hardest thing I have ever done. Each step felt like I was abandoning a part of my soul. I signaled to Sarah, and she unlocked the door. I took one last look at my son lying in the gloom, his eyes fixed on me with a mixture of hope and fear. I walked out into the hallway, and Sarah locked the door behind me. The click of the deadbolt sounded like a gunshot. I thanked her without a word and slipped back into the shadows of the kitchen. As I stepped out into the cold night air, the tears on my face dried instantly. I was done crying. I had a lawyer to call and a trap to set. Vanessa thought she was the puppet master, but she had no idea she had just cut the strings holding back a monster. I sat in the fluorescent glare of a 24-hour diner, nursing a cup of black coffee that tasted like burnt rubber. My hands were still shaking, not from fear, but from the aftershocks of seeing my son in that cage. I was waiting for the only man in this city I could trust. Mitch walked in 10 minutes later, still wearing his brown uniform, his face drawn with exhaustion. He slid into the booth opposite me and looked at my bruised face without flinching. He did not ask if the package was real. He knew. "I saw him, Mitch," I said, my voice quiet and hard. "She put him in a warehouse for the dying. She is starving him." Mitch gripped his coffee mug so hard his knuckles turned white. He looked down at the table, struggling with his own anger. "I knew something was wrong, Mr. Kowalski," he said. "For 2 years I deliver packages to that mansion, and I never see Nash. Just her and that oily guy Gavin. But a nursing home. That is sick." I leaned forward. "I am going to take them down, Mitch, but I cannot do it alone. I have no car that runs well, no money, and a police record if she decides to press charges for tonight. I need eyes on the ground. I need someone who can get close to her without raising suspicion." Mitch looked up. His eyes were clear and steady. "Do you remember 5 years ago when I reversed the delivery truck into the loading dock door at the mill? I caused $10,000 in damage. I was going to be fired. I had a baby on the way and no savings." I nodded. I remembered. "Nash fixed the paperwork," Mitch said. "He listed it as structural failure due to rust. He saved my job. He saved my family. I never got to pay him back." He reached across the table and tapped his finger on the formica. "I am in. Whatever you need, I am in. I need to know her schedule," I told him. "I need to know exactly when she leaves the house and when she comes back. I need to get inside that mansion one more time, not to smash things, but to plant ears and eyes. We need proof of the fraud to show a judge." Mitch nodded slowly. "I deliver to her street every day around 11. She usually leaves for yoga or brunch right after. And the guy Gavin, he comes over around 2. I can park the truck down the block and watch. I can log every move they make. And I have a cousin who installs home security systems. He might have some equipment we can borrow. Tiny cameras. The kind you hide in a smoke detector." I looked at this man, this delivery driver who had more honor in his little finger than Vanessa had in her entire body. A lump formed in my throat. "This is dangerous, Mitch. If we get caught, you could lose your job." Mitch stood up and put his cap back on. "Some things are more important than a job, Mr. Kowalski. Nash saved my life. Now it is my turn to help save his. You get some sleep. I will start the log tomorrow morning. We are going to catch her." The next morning, I did something that felt like cutting off my own arm. I drove my old Ford pickup to a used car lot on the south side and sold it for $1,200 cash. It was worth more, but I did not have the time to haggle. Walking away from that truck felt like leaving behind the last piece of my old life. It was the truck I used to drive Nash to baseball practice in. It was the truck I drove to Martha's funeral. But sentimentality was a luxury I could no longer afford. I took a bus to a pawn shop downtown. I unclasped the gold watch from my wrist. It was a vintage Omega that Martha had saved for 3 years to buy me for our 30th anniversary. The inscription on the back read, "To Bernie, my timeless love." The broker looked at it with a jeweler's loupe and offered me $4,000. I took the money without blinking. I told myself that Martha would not mind. She would sell her own soul if it meant saving our son. With a thick envelope of cash in my jacket pocket, I walked into the glass skyscraper that housed the law offices of Solomon Cohen. Cohen was a legend in the city. They called him the Wolf of Wall Street, not because he was a stockbroker, but because he tore apart anyone who got in his way during high-stakes divorces. He was expensive, he was ruthless, and he was exactly what I needed. His receptionist tried to turn me away because of my flannel shirt and work boots, but I slammed the envelope of cash onto her desk and told her I had 5 minutes to pitch a case that would make the evening news. When I walked into Cohen's office, he did not even look up from his paperwork. I sit down and start talking. I told him about the deepfake video. I told him about the power of attorney fraud. I told him about the warehouse of dying people where my son was being held prisoner. Cohen kept writing. But when I mentioned the $2 million trust fund trap I was planning, he stopped. He put his pen down and looked at me over the rim of his glasses. His eyes were dark and sharp like obsidian. "You want to bait a trap for a sociopath using a fake inheritance?" he asked, his voice smooth as gravel. "And you want me to draft the legal papers to make it look legitimate?" I nodded, pushing the stack of cash across his mahogany desk. "This is $5,000. It is everything I have left in the world. I need you to help me destroy her legally. I need you to freeze her assets the moment she steps into that trap." Cohen picked up the envelope and weighed it in his hand. Then a slow, terrifying smile spread across his face. He leaned back in his leather chair and laughed. "Bernard, I usually charge double this just to open a file. But I have to admit, I have not heard a story this twisted in 20 years. A wife who buries her husband alive to spend his money. That is biblical." He pressed a button on his intercom. "Cancel my lunch," he barked. "And bring me the standard trust formation documents. The scorched earth version." For the next 3 hours, we worked. Cohen was a magician with words. He drafted a dummy document for a fictional trust fund, supposedly left by my late wife. It looked official, complete with embossed seals and complex legal jargon. It stated that upon Nash's 40th birthday, control of the family estate would transfer to his primary caregiver if he was incapacitated. It was the perfect lure for a greedy woman. We also drafted an emergency petition for guardianship and a forensic accounting request to track every penny she had stolen. Cohen worked with a manic energy, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the hunt. By the time I walked out of that office, I had no truck, I had no watch, and I had no money for food. But I carried a briefcase filled with paper dynamite. I was not just a helpless father anymore. I was a man with a nuclear weapon, and I was about to drop it right in the middle of Vanessa's perfect life. The heat wave that descended on the city the next morning was oppressive, but for us, it was a gift from God. Mitch arrived at the mansion at 10 o'clock sharp, wearing a pair of blue coveralls he had borrowed from his cousin and carrying a heavy metal toolbox. He looked nothing like the delivery driver who brought Vanessa her shoes. He looked like a tired, overworked maintenance man. From my vantage point in a rental sedan down the street, I watched him ring the doorbell. My heart was hammering against my ribs. If Vanessa recognized him, the game was over before it began. She opened the door, looking annoyed, holding a glass of iced tea. I saw Mitch point to the clipboard and gesture to the roof. He was telling her the lie we had rehearsed, that the homeowners association mandated an emergency check of the central cooling units due to the heat warnings. Vanessa rolled her eyes and stepped back to let him in. She did not even look at his face. To her, people like us were just furniture, tools to keep her life comfortable. Mitch was inside for 20 minutes. Each minute felt like an hour. I imagined Gavin walking in and spotting him. I imagined Vanessa catching him standing on a chair in the bedroom. But finally the front door opened and Mitch walked out. He wiped his brow with a rag, walked calmly to his van, and drove away. I followed him to a secluded parking lot behind the abandoned strip mall. We sat in the back of his van surrounded by monitors. Mitch typed a command into his laptop, and suddenly the screen flickered to life. The image was grainy but clear. We were looking into the living room of my house from the perspective of the smoke detector. A second feed showed the master bedroom. The angle was perfect. We did not have to wait long for the payoff. Around 2 in the afternoon, Gavin arrived. He did not knock. He used his key. He walked into the living room and threw his briefcase on the sofa my wife had picked out 30 years ago. Vanessa walked in from the kitchen and handed him a glass of wine. "Is it done?" she asked, her voice echoing slightly on the audio feed. Gavin took a sip and smiled. "The shell companies are ready. As soon as Nash turns 40 on Friday, the trust allows for a one-time withdrawal of capital for business expansion. Since you have power of attorney, you can drain the entire corporate account. $3 million, Vanessa, plus the proceeds from the house sale next week." Vanessa laughed, a sound that made my skin crawl. Finally, she said, spinning around, "I am so sick of this act. I am sick of visiting that smelly nursing home to keep up appearances. What do we do about Nash once the money is moved?" Gavin shrugged, loosening his tie. "He is weak, Vanessa. Once the checks clear, we stop paying the facility. They will transfer him to a state ward. Without his medication, and with his current condition, he will not last a month in the public system. Pneumonia will take care of the rest. It will look like natural causes." I stared at the screen, my hands gripping the edge of the table until they cramped. They were planning a murder. It was slow and bureaucratic, but it was murder all the same. They were going to cash out on his birthday and let him die alone in the gutter. Mitch looked at me, then his face pale. I looked back at him, and for the first time in days, I smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile. "They are waiting for his birthday," I whispered. "Good. That gives us 3 days. They want a party. Let us give them a celebration they will never forget." I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress in the cheap motel room, staring at the burner phone in my hand. This was the most dangerous part of the plan. I had to be an actor. I had to become the very thing Vanessa claimed I was. A broken, senile old man who had finally accepted defeat. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes to summon the image of my son shivering in that bed. I let the grief wash over me, but instead of pushing it away, I used it. I let it seep into my voice, making it crack and tremble. I dialed the number that I knew by heart. It rang 4 times. I almost thought she would not answer. Then the line clicked open. There was no greeting, just a cold, impatient sigh. "Make it quick, Bernard," she said. "I am 2 seconds away from blocking this number." "Vanessa, please do not hang up," I stammered, forcing my voice to sound weak and breathless. "I am not calling to fight. I am calling to apologize." There was a pause on the other end. She was listening. "I have been sleeping in my truck, Vanessa." I continued, letting a sob catch in my throat. "I am cold. I am hungry, and I have had a lot of time to think. You were right. I think I am losing my mind. I look at things and I get confused. I see enemies where there are none. The doctor at the clinic said my blood pressure is dangerously high. I am just a tired old man, and I do not want to die angry." I heard the clinking of ice in a glass. Her guard was lowering just a fraction. "It is good that you finally admit it, Dad," she said, her tone softening into that fake, patronizing sweetness. "We only did what was best for Nash. And for you. You were becoming unstable. I know, I said, swallowing the bile that rose in my throat. I know that now. But Vanessa, there is one more thing. When I was outside the house the other night before I fell, I saw you in your robe. I saw the way you held your stomach. I paused, letting the silence stretch. Is it true? I whispered. Is there a baby? She hesitated. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. She was calculating. If she admitted to the pregnancy, it would cement her hold on the family fortune. It would make her the mother of the heir. Yes, Bernard, she said quietly. I am 3 months along. It is Nash's final gift to us, a little miracle. It was a lie so bold it made my skin crawl. Nash had been in that facility for 2 years, paralyzed and drugged. There was no way that child was his. It belonged to Gavin. But I played my part perfectly. Oh, thank God, I cried, letting real tears of frustration masquerade as joy. A grandchild, a piece of my boy lives on. Vanessa, listen to me. I want to make things right. I have that old trust fund document from Martha, the one for the grandchildren. I want to sign it over to you, for the baby. I want to come to the birthday party on Friday. Please, just let me see the house one last time. Let me toast to the future, and then I will disappear, I promise. Vanessa hummed a sound of pure victory. She thought she had broken me completely. She thought she was about to get another pile of money to add to her hoard. Fine, she said. Friday at 7. But clean yourself up, Bernard, and if you cause a scene, the security guards will not be as gentle as last time. Thank you, I whispered. Thank you, daughter. I hung up the phone and the mask fell away instantly. My hands stopped shaking. The weakness in my spine vanished. She had taken the bait. She thought she was inviting a defeated old man to her party. She had no idea she had just invited the executioner. I arranged to meet Vanessa at a coffee shop halfway between the mansion and the downtown district. I arrived 30 minutes early, choosing a table in the corner where the shadows were deep enough to hide the sharp alertness in my eyes. I wore my most threadbare jacket, and I let my shoulders slump forward in a posture of defeat. When Vanessa walked in, she sucked the air out of the room. She was wearing oversized sunglasses and a trench coat that cost more than my first car. She scanned the room with disdain before spotting me and walking over, checking her watch, as if she were doing me a massive favor. I did not waste time with pleasantries. I reached into my bag and pulled out the heavy cream-colored envelope that Cohen had prepared. I slid it across the table with a trembling hand. This is what I wanted to tell you about on the phone, I whispered, my voice raspy. I found it in Martha's old safety deposit box. I had forgotten the key existed until I was going through my things to sell them. Vanessa picked up the envelope delicately, using only 2 fingers, as if afraid she might catch poverty from it. She pulled out the document. It was a masterpiece of forgery. The paper was heavy and textured, bonded with a gold seal. The header read, "The Martha Kowalski Family Trust." I watched her eyes scan the page. I saw the moment she hit the dollar figure. Her pupils dilated behind her dark glasses. $2 million, she breathed the number slipping out before she could catch herself. She looked up at me, and for the first time in years, she looked at me with genuine interest. Is this real? It is real, I lied, leaning in close. Martha put it away 30 years ago. It was supposed to be a surprise. It has been gathering compound interest in high-yield bonds. But look at the date, Vanessa. Look at the maturation clause. She looked back down. The trust unlocks on the beneficiary's 40th birthday. That is this Friday. That is Nash's birthday. I nodded, wiping a fake tear from my cheek. I cannot manage this kind of money, Vanessa. Look at me. I am a mess. I am checking myself into the state-run nursing home on Monday. I do not have the mental capacity to handle lawyers and bankers anymore. I want to transfer the trustee rights to you. You are his wife. You are the mother of his child. It should be yours to control." I saw the greed war with the suspicion in her mind. It was too good to be true, but predators like Vanessa believe they deserve everything good that happens to them. She believed that the universe existed solely to give her money. She looked at the document and then at the signature line Cohen had prepared. "So you just want to sign it over?" she asked, testing the waters. "Just like that?" "I just want peace," I said, bowing my head. "I want to know my grandchild is taken care of. If you bring the notary papers to the party on Friday, I will sign everything. The 2 million, the control, all of it. Just let me hold the baby when it is born and I will go away quietly." Vanessa smiled. It was a terrifying smile, a shark smelling blood in the water. She folded the document and put it in her designer bag. It was the final nail in her own coffin, and she had no idea. "You are doing the right thing, Dad," she said, patting my hand with cold condescension. "We will see you on Friday. Do not be late." She walked out of the coffee shop with a bounce in her step, already spending the money in her head. I watched her go and took a sip of my cold coffee. She thought she was walking away with a fortune, but she had just signed a confession. The trap was set, and she had walked right into the center of the bullseye. The air inside Mitch's surveillance van was thick with humidity and the smell of stale coffee, but neither of us dared to crack a window. We were glued to the glowing monitors, watching the scene unfold in the living room of the mansion I used to own. It was disgusting. It was infuriating, and it was absolutely perfect for our case. On the screen, Vanessa and Gavin were not behaving like a grieving wife and a professional financial advisor. They were celebrating like bank robbers who had just pulled off the heist of the century. Gavin had opened a bottle of vintage champagne, one of the bottles I had been saving for Nash's first child. He poured the golden liquid into 2 crystal flutes and handed one to Vanessa. She took it with a predatory grin, her face flushed with the intoxication of greed. To the old man, Gavin toasted, clinking his glass against hers. To Bernard and his convenient senility, may he rot in that state nursing home quickly and quietly. Vanessa threw her head back and laughed, a sound that was sharp and cruel through the tiny microphone speakers. "I cannot believe he actually fell for it," she said, taking a long sip. "He sat there in that coffee shop wearing those rags, looking like a kicked puppy. He actually thinks I am going to let him hold the baby." She rubbed her stomach and looked at Gavin with a smirk. "By the way, we need to make sure the paternity test results are buried deep. If anyone finds out this kid is yours and not Nash's, the trust could contest the payout." Gavin waved his hand dismissively. "Do not worry, babe. Once the money is in your account, it does not matter. Possession is 9/10 of the law. And with Bernard signing over his rights on Friday, we are untouchable." They moved to the sofa, sitting close together, plotting the final details of their grand performance. "We need to make this party look legitimate," Vanessa said, tapping on her phone. "I am hiring the best caterers in the city. Lobster, caviar, the works. We need to invite the mayor, the partners from your firm, and all the neighbors. We need witnesses, Gavin. We need everyone to see the devoted wife celebrating her sick husband's 40th birthday. When Bernard hands over the trust fund in front of 100 people, it will be ironclad." "It is brilliant," Gavin agreed, kissing her neck. "A public transfer of assets. It makes him look lucid and generous. If he tries to claim fraud later, we will have 50 witnesses who saw him smiling and signing the papers voluntarily. We are not just stealing the money, Vanessa. We are laundering it through his own stupidity." I watched them entwined on the sofa, mocking my pain and planning to dance on my son's grave. My hands were clenched into fists, so tight, my fingernails dug into my palms. Mitch reached out and touched my shoulder. "We got it, Mr. Kowalski," he whispered, pointing to the recording light that was blinking steadily in the corner of the screen. "We have the conspiracy. We have the admission of the affair. We have the plan to defraud. They just confessed to everything." I looked at the screen one last time, at the monsters toasting to their victory. They were so arrogant, so sure of their superiority. They had no idea that the old man they were laughing at was sitting in a van 2 blocks away, holding the detonator to their lives. Enjoy the champagne, I thought, staring into Gavin's smug eyes. Drink it up, because on Friday you are going to choke on it. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was transformed into a golden cage of excess, a grotesque display of wealth that cost more than my son's life was apparently worth. Waiters in white gloves drifted through the crowd, carrying silver trays piled high with beluga caviar and truffle-infused hors d'oeuvres, while a string quartet played soft classical music in the corner. The scent of expensive perfume and fresh lilies was overpowering, masking the rot that lay at the heart of this celebration. Every detail, from the ice sculpture of an oil derrick to the silk tablecloths, had been paid for with the money Vanessa had stripped from Nash's accounts. It was a feast for vultures, and they had all come to feed. The room was packed with the city's elite. I recognized the faces from the society pages. There were the partners from Gavin's law firm, laughing loudly and slapping each other on the back. There were the neighbors who had turned their backs on me when I was thrown out of my own home. They were drinking vintage champagne and eating lobster, oblivious to the fact that the man they were toasting was lying in a bed of filth 10 miles away. They were not here for Nash. They were here for the open bar and the chance to be seen next to the grieving but glamorous wife. Vanessa stood at the center of it all, radiating a cold, manufactured beauty. She wore a floor-length gown of shimmering silver that clung to her body like a second skin, and around her neck hung a diamond necklace that I knew for a fact had been bought last week. She played the role of the martyr perfectly. She moved from group to group, accepting their sympathies with a brave, tragic smile. She dabbed at her dry eyes with a lace handkerchief every time someone asked about Nash. "He is heartbroken. He could not be here," she told the mayor, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing. "But the negotiations in Dubai are at a critical stage. He is doing this for us. He is sacrificing his 40th birthday to build our future." It was a performance worthy of an Oscar. She gestured to the empty chair at the head of the main table, the seat of honor reserved for the husband she had erased. A single spotlight shone on the empty seat, a dramatic touch designed to elicit pity. The guests murmured their admiration for her strength. They saw a devoted wife holding the fort. I saw a spider spinning the final threads of her web. She kept checking the entrance, her eyes darting toward the heavy double doors every few seconds. She was not looking for her husband. She was looking for me. She was looking for the broken old man who was supposed to walk in and hand her the keys to the kingdom. She had positioned Gavin at her right hand, and every time their eyes met, I could see the spark of greed they shared. They thought this party was their coronation. They thought the night would end with a toast to their new fortune. They had no idea that the guest list was about to change, and that the gift I was bringing was not a check, but a reckoning. The clock on the wall ticked towards 7. The stage was set. The audience was seated. It was time to start the show. The chime of a silver spoon, tapping against a crystal champagne flute, cut through the murmurs of the crowd, silencing the room instantly. All eyes turned toward the stage where Vanessa stood, bathed in the harsh white glow of the spotlight. She looked small and vulnerable, a perfectly calculated image designed to tug at the heartstrings of every wealthy donor and socialite in the room. She took a deep breath, gripping the microphone stand with both hands, as if she needed it to hold herself upright. To the casual observer, she was a woman trying to be strong in the face of loneliness. But I knew better. I was watching a predator camouflage herself before the strike. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice soft and trembling, just enough to sound like she was holding back tears. "I know Nash would have given anything to be here tonight. 40 years old. It is a milestone that every man should spend with his family. But as many of you know, my husband is a man of duty. He called me this morning from Dubai, his voice so tired from weeks of endless negotiations. He told me he misses home. He told me he misses us. But he is out there building a legacy not just for himself, but for the child I am carrying. A collective sigh of sympathy rippled through the ballroom. Women dabbed their eyes with handkerchiefs, and men nodded solemnly, respecting the hustle of the absent hero. Gavin stepped out from the shadows at the edge of the stage. He placed a hand on Vanessa's shoulder, giving it a gentle squeeze. It looked like a gesture of platonic comfort from a loyal family friend, but from where I stood, I could see the possessive weight of his grip. He was not comforting her, he was signaling her. He was the director of this play, reminding his lead actress to stick to the script. Vanessa leaned into his touch, looking up at him with grateful eyes, before turning back to the crowd. "It has been a difficult year," she continued, her voice gaining a little more strength. "With Nash away so much, the burden of managing our affairs has fallen on my shoulders. It is a heavy weight to carry alone. But Nash asked me to be strong. He asked me to ensure that no matter what happens to him, our future is secure. That is why tonight is about more than just a birthday. It is about a transition." She paused for dramatic effect, letting the silence hang heavy in the air. She smoothed the silk of her gown over her stomach, drawing everyone's attention to the unborn child that was the linchpin of her con. "My father-in-law Bernard was supposed to be here this evening. He is a good man, but age and grief have taken a toll on his mind. He has realized that the family trust to the nest egg meant to protect this baby is too complex for him to manage in his condition. He wants to do the right thing. He wants to sign over control to me so that I can ensure Nash's legacy survives." She looked toward the double doors at the back of the room, her face a mask of hopeful anticipation. She was waiting for the broken, defeated old man she had met in the coffee shop. She was waiting for me to shuffle in and hand her the weapon she would use to kill my son. She raised her glass high, the diamond on her finger catching the light. "So please raise your glasses with me. To Nash, to family, and to doing what is necessary to protect the ones we love." The crowd roared their approval glasses, clinking as they drank the expensive champagne. Vanessa smiled, a wide, triumphant smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She thought the game was over. She thought she had won. She had no idea that the man waiting on the other side of those doors was not coming to surrender. I was coming to burn her kingdom to the ground. The sound of crystal glasses clinking was shattered by a noise that sounded like a cannon blast. The massive double mahogany doors at the back of the ballroom did not just open, they exploded inward, slamming against the gilded walls with a violence that shook the floor. The string quartet stopped playing instantly. The cello player froze his bow, hovering in midair. The chatter of 300 guests died in their throats. Every single head in the room turned as one toward the entrance, expecting to see a disturbance, or perhaps the security guards removing a drunk. I stood in the center of the doorway. I was not wearing the dirty flannel shirt and torn jeans Vanessa expected. I was wearing my old tuxedo. It was 20 years old and tight at the shoulders, but it was pressed and clean, and it commanded respect. But I was not the one they were staring at. I was merely the vehicle. Seated in a brand new wheelchair pushed by my calloused hands was the man of the hour. Nash. He was not the filth-covered skeleton I had found in the dark room of Sunnyvale. We had spent the last 2 days scrubbing the stench of that prison from his skin. He was shaved close to the skin. His hair was trimmed and combed back. He was wearing his favorite charcoal suit, the very one Vanessa had stuffed into a garbage bag days ago. It hung loosely on his emaciated frame, draping over his thin shoulders like a shroud. But he did not look weak. He looked like a king returning from a long and brutal war. His face was pale and gaunt, his cheekbones sharp enough to cut glass, but his eyes were burning with a fire that could incinerate the world. A silence descended on the room that was so heavy, it felt like the air had been sucked out. It was a dead, suffocating quiet. You could hear the hum of the air conditioning and the terrified intake of breath from the front row. The smile fell from Vanessa's face as if it had been slapped off. She stood on the stage, frozen, her mouth hanging open in a silent scream of disbelief. Her skin turned a sickly shade of gray. Beside her, Gavin looked like he had seen a ghost. His arrogant posture collapsed, and the champagne glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the floor and shattered, the sound echoing like a gunshot in the tomb-like silence. I did not say a word. I did not have to. I just started walking. I pushed my son down the center aisle, the wheels of his chair humming softly on the plush carpet. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. These wealthy socialites and business partners who had just been drinking his wine stepped back in horror and awe. They looked from the healthy, glowing image of Nash on the projection screen to the frail, determined reality sitting before them. They saw the truth in his hollow eyes. They saw the lie in Vanessa's speech. We stopped right at the foot of the stage. The spotlight that had been searching for a victim found us instead, illuminating us in a harsh white halo. I locked the brakes on the wheelchair and stepped to the side, placing a protective hand on Nash's shoulder. I looked up at the woman who had tried to bury us. I saw the panic rising in her chest. I saw her look for an exit, but there was nowhere to run. Nash lifted his head slowly, fighting the tremors in his neck. He took a deep, rattling breath and locked eyes with his wife. The entire room waited breathless for the first shot to be fired. The glass that Vanessa had been holding slipped from her fingers as if her hands had suddenly turned to oil. It hit the stage floor with a shatter that sounded like a gunshot. In the silent room, sending shards of crystal and expensive champagne spraying across the hem of her silver gown. She did not flinch. She did not look down. She was paralyzed, staring at the husband she had buried alive. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. The carefully constructed mask of the grieving wife had cracked, and beneath it the crowd could see the raw, terrified face of a woman who knew her life was over. Gavin was the first to snap out of the trance. His survival instinct kicked in, fueled by the millions of dollars he saw slipping away. He jumped off the edge of the stage, his face twisting into a mask of faux concern that looked more like aggression. "You cannot bring him in here," he shouted, marching toward us with his hand raised. "He is sick. He is delusional. You are endangering his life, Bernard. Get him out of here right now before I call security." He lunged for the handle of the wheelchair, trying to physically spin Nash around, but he never made it. Two men in dark suits who looked like they were carved out of granite stepped out from the crowd. They moved with a speed that belied their size, intercepting Gavin before he could touch us. They were Solomon Cohen's private security. One of them placed a heavy hand on Gavin's chest, stopping him dead in his tracks. The other simply crossed his arms and stared him down. Gavin froze, looking around for help, but the guests were backing away, recoiling from his desperation. I did not even slow down. I pushed the wheelchair past Gavin, who was now being boxed in by the security team. I saw Cohen standing near the front row, sipping a glass of water and watching the scene with a cold, satisfied smile. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. The path was clear. I pushed Nash up the access ramp at the side of the stage, the rubber tires humming on the wood. Every rotation of the wheels felt like a victory. Every foot we advanced was a reclamation of the dignity they had stolen. We reached the center of the stage. The heat from the spotlight was intense, blindingly bright. I locked the brakes right next to the podium. Vanessa stumbled back, her heels catching on her dress. She looked small now. The grand manipulator was shrinking in the presence of the truth. Nash sat there, his chest heaving with the effort of holding his head up. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. 300 people held their breath, waiting. Nash slowly lifted his hand. It was trembling violently, shaking like a leaf in a storm. He reached out toward the microphone stand. I wanted to help him, but I knew he had to do this himself. He gripped the metal stand, his knuckles turning white. He pulled the microphone down until it was level with his lips. He took a wet, rattling breath that echoed through the massive speakers. He turned his head slowly, painfully, until his eyes locked onto Vanessa's face. A faint ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had walked through fire and survived. "Hello, my love." He rasped, his voice sounding like grinding stones, but clear enough for every person in the room to hear. "I made it back from Dubai. Did you miss me?" Vanessa opened her mouth to speak, to spin another lie, to try and charm her way out of the impossible situation. But she never got the chance. Behind us, the massive projection screen that had been displaying the touching slideshow of Nash's life gave a digital screech that made everyone cover their ears. The photo of the handsome, healthy executive standing in the desert vanished into a burst of static. The room went dark for a split second, and then the screen flickered back to life. But this was not a curated memory. This was raw, high-definition reality broadcast in 40-foot Technicolor. The first image was grainy but unmistakable. It was the living room of my mansion, filmed from the angle of a smoke detector. The date stamp in the corner read 2 days ago. The crowd watched in stunned silence as Vanessa walked into the frame wearing her silk robe and poured 2 glasses of wine. Then Gavin walked in. He did not greet her with a handshake. He pulled her close, his hands roaming over her body, with a familiarity that made the wealthy matrons in the front row gasp and cover their mouths. On screen, the couple laughed, toasting to their brilliance, while they mocked the husband they had betrayed. The image was grotesque, a violation of every vow Vanessa had ever taken, but it was just the appetizer. The screen flickered again, cutting to a handheld camera moving through a dark hallway. The audience saw the peeling paint of Sunnyvale. They saw the filth on the floors. Then the camera turned into room 104. A collective shriek of horror ripped through the ballroom. On the screen, illuminated by the harsh light of my phone flashlight, was Nash. Not the man in the suit sitting before them now, but the broken skeleton I had found. He was lying in his own waste, his eyes wide with terror, his wrists bruised from restraints. The contrast between the starving man on the screen and the lobster dinners on the tables was so violent that I saw a woman near the stage turn away and vomit. Then came the sound. Mitch had layered the audio from the bugged living room over the video of the dying man. Gavin's voice boomed through the concert-quality speakers, clear and arrogant. "Once the check's clear, we stop paying the facility. Pneumonia will take care of the rest. It will look like natural causes." And then Vanessa's voice answered, smooth and cold. "I just want him gone, Gavin. I want the money, and I want him gone." The audio hung in the air, a confession of conspiracy to commit murder broadcast to 300 witnesses. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The shock evaporated, replaced by a palpable wave of revulsion and rage. The guests who had been admiring Vanessa's dress moments ago were now looking at her as if she were a monster. The illusion was shattered. There was no grieving wife. There was only a black widow caught in her own web. Vanessa stood trembling under the weight of the evidence, the red light of the projector hitting her face like a laser sight. She looked out at the sea of accusatory eyes, and for the first time she realized that no amount of money could buy her way out of this. The video ended on a freeze frame of her laughing face while the audio of Nash begging for water played in a loop. The verdict was in and the executioner was waiting. The silence that followed the video was broken by the sound of heavy footsteps on the wooden stage. Solomon Cohen stepped out from the shadows of the wings, moving with the slow, deliberate menace of a predator who has already cornered his prey. He did not look like a party guest. He looked like an executioner in a 3-piece suit. He walked past the sobbing Vanessa and the stunned Gavin, taking his place at the podium next to Nash. He placed a thick stack of blue legal folders on the stand, the sound echoing like a gavel strike in the quiet room. He adjusted his glasses and looked out at the sea of shocked faces. "I am Solomon Cohen," he announced, his voice deep and resonating with authority. "I am the attorney representing Mr. Nash Kowalski, and I am not here to make a toast. I am here to serve an eviction notice on a life built entirely on lies." Vanessa looked up, her mascara running down her cheeks in black streaks. "You cannot do this," she shrieked, her voice shrill and desperate. "This is my party. I am his wife. I control the accounts." Cohen ignored her. He opened the first folder and held up a document stamped with a red government seal. "This is an emergency injunction granted by the Supreme Court less than an hour ago," he read calmly. "It declares that all powers of attorney signed by Nash Kowalski are null and void due to proven incapacity and fraud. It also freezes every single asset connected to the Kowalski name, the bank accounts, the investment portfolios, even the trust fund you were drooling over. It is all locked, Vanessa. You cannot buy a pack of gum, let alone a plane ticket." He flipped the page and a cruel smile played on his lips. "But that is not the worst news. You see, in your greed, you took out massive loans against the company to fund your lifestyle. You bought cars, you bought jewelry, you threw this disgusting party. You signed those loans as Nash, assuming his life insurance would pay them off when you finally let him die." He leaned into the microphone, his eyes boring into hers. "But Nash is alive. And because you signed those documents in bad faith and used the money for personal embezzlement, the court has ruled that the corporate veil is pierced. The estate is not liable for that debt, Vanessa. You are." A gasp went through the crowd. Cohen picked up a piece of paper and read the figure aloud, emphasizing every syllable. $3,400,000. That is the total amount of debt you have personally accrued. The creditors have already been notified of the fraud. They are not coming for the company. They are coming for you. They will take your car. They will take your clothes. They will take every single diamond you are wearing right now." Vanessa swayed on her feet, clutching the podium for support. She looked at Gavin, but he had already backed away, trying to distance himself from the blast radius. She was not just caught. She was obliterated. In the span of 5 minutes, she had gone from a wealthy widow to a destitute criminal, facing a mountain of debt she could never repay. Cohen closed the folder with a final terrifying snap. "You are not walking out of here a millionaire, Mrs. Kowalski. You are walking out of here with a negative net worth and a very long prison sentence waiting for you." The wail of sirens outside the hotel was the only music left in the ballroom. It pierced the heavy velvet drapes and shattered the last remnants of the party's atmosphere. The double doors swung open for the third time that night, but there was no theatricality to this entrance. A phalanx of uniformed officers marched into the room, followed closely by 2 grim-faced detectives. The guests who had spent the evening sipping champagne and gossiping now parted with terrified urgency, pressing themselves against the walls to avoid being associated with the criminals on stage. Gavin saw them coming first. The arrogance that had defined him for years evaporated instantly, leaving behind a sweating, trembling coward. He took a step back, knocking over the podium microphone, which screeched as it hit the floor. He looked toward the side exit, calculating his odds of running, but he saw the massive form of Cohen's security guard blocking the path. He was trapped. Officer arrested him first. I watched as the detective grabbed Gavin's expensive suit jacket and spun him around. The force of it nearly knocked the wind out of him. Gavin slammed into the wall and I heard him whimpering. "Please wait," he stammered, his voice pitching up an octave. "I am an attorney. I can explain. I was just following instructions. It was not me." Vanessa did not go quietly. When the female officer reached for her, she snapped. The facade of the elegant pregnant wife disintegrated into pure feral hysteria. She slapped the officer's hand away and backed up until she bumped into the projection screen that was still showing her own infidelity. "No," she shrieked, her face twisting into an ugly mask of rage. "You cannot touch me. I am the victim here." "He did this." She pointed a shaking finger at Gavin, who was currently being cuffed against the wall. "He manipulated me," she screamed, spitting the words out. "He is the one who set up the shell companies. He told me Nash was never waking up. I just wanted to protect my family. He forced me to do it." Gavin twisted his head around his face, purple with indignation. "You lying witch!" he yelled back, struggling against the officer. It was your idea from the start. You came to me. You said you wanted the cripple out of the way. You signed the do not resuscitate order. I have the emails. I have the texts. I kept everything just in case you tried to pull this. The crowd watched in morbid fascination as the two lovers turned on each other, tearing each other apart with the same viciousness they had used on my son. It was pathetic. It was satisfying. The officers did not listen to the shouting. They simply did their job. I heard the sharp metallic click of the handcuffs locking onto Vanessa's wrists. The sound was more beautiful than any symphony. She struggled, kicking out with her silver heels, tearing the hem of her expensive gown, but it was useless. They were dragged off the stage not like royalty, but like common trash. As they were led down the aisle they had planned to walk down in triumph, they passed right by me. The officer paused for a brief second. Vanessa looked up at me, her hair wild, her makeup smeared, looking for a shred of mercy in my eyes. She found none. I stood next to Nash's wheelchair, my hand resting on his shoulder. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply looked at them with the cold, detached indifference of a man taking out the garbage. I watched them disappear through the doors, the flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers illuminating their shame. They had taken 2 years of our lives. They had tried to take my son's dignity. But as the doors swung shut behind them, I knew that the debt had finally been paid in full. They were gone, and for the first time in a long time, the air in the room felt clean. The wheels of justice usually grind slowly, but with the mountain of evidence we provided, the system moved with a terrifying speed. The trial lasted only 3 weeks, but it felt like a lifetime of vindication packed into every single day. Gavin tried to represent himself, thinking his legal degree would save him. It was a mistake. Solomon Cohen tore through his arguments like a wolf tearing through paper. Every objection Gavin raised was met with another video clip, another financial record, or another testimony from the nursing home staff. He was not a lawyer in that courtroom. He was a drowning man flailing in a sea of his own making. Vanessa did not fare any better. She tried to play the fragile mother, to be relying on the pregnancy to gain sympathy from the jury. But when the prosecution played the audio of her wishing for Nash's death, while she drank expensive wine, the jury turned to stone. There was no pity for her. There was only disgust. When the foreman stood up to read the verdict, he did not even look at them. Guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, embezzlement, and elder abuse. The sentencing hearing was the final nail in the coffin. The judge was a stern woman with eyes that had seen too much evil, and she had no patience for their tears. She looked down from the bench, her face like granite. You treated a human life like a ledger entry, she told them. You stripped a man of his dignity for profit. She sentenced Gavin to 15 years in a federal penitentiary for his role in the financial crimes and the conspiracy. But for Vanessa, she reserved the harshest punishment. For the betrayal of a spouse and the calculated torture of a disabled person, she was given 20 years without the possibility of parole. I watched as the bailiffs led them away in orange jumpsuits. They were not screaming anymore. They were silent, broken, and finally powerless. 2 weeks after the heavy wooden doors of the prison slammed shut behind them, I sat in Cohen's office. He slid a heavy iron key across his mahogany desk. It was an old key, one that I recognized immediately. The court has declared the transfer of the deed fraudulent, Cohen explained. The sale of the house has been voided. The loans Vanessa took out have been attached to her personal liability, not the property. The house is yours again, Bernard. Free and clear. I took the key in my hand. It felt cold and heavy, but it also felt like hope. I drove to the old neighborhood that afternoon. The landscaping was overgrown, and the windows were dirty, but the house was still standing. I walked up the concrete steps, the same steps where Gavin had shoved me weeks ago. The blood was gone, washed away by the rain. I stood on the porch and took a deep breath. The air did not smell of expensive perfume or deceit anymore. It smelled of rain and brick and memories. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house was quiet. The modern furniture Vanessa had bought was gone, seized by the creditors to pay off her debts. The rooms were empty, echoing with the sound of my footsteps. But as I walked through the hallway, I did not feel lonely. I felt a sense of peace settling over the walls. The monsters were gone. The evil had been purged. I walked into the living room and looked out the window at the garden. It was a mess, but weeds could be pulled. Flowers could be replanted. I rolled up my sleeves and started to sweep the floor. I had a lot of work to do to get this place ready. My son was coming home and I wanted everything to be perfect. The winter finally broke and gave way to a spring that felt like the first real season I had seen in years. It has been 6 months since the gavel fell and the heavy doors of the prison closed behind Vanessa and Gavin. 6 months since I walked back into that empty, echoing house to reclaim my property. But we did not stay there. That mansion was a monument to a life that had almost destroyed us. The walls remembered the shouting, and the floors remembered the betrayal. So we sold it. We sold everything. The crystal chandeliers, the designer furniture, and the imported cars. We took the money and we ran not from the law, but toward a new life. We found a place 3 hours north of the city. It is an old farmhouse sitting on 40 acres of rolling green hills, where the only noise is the wind in the oak trees and the distant call of a hawk. There are no sirens here. There are no cameras hidden in smoke detectors, and no society parties filled with fake smiles. There is only the smell of turned earth and wild grass, and the peace that comes with silence. The doctors told us not to get our hopes up. They said Nash would likely never walk without a cane. They said the muscle atrophy was too severe and the nerve damage from the drugs was permanent. But they did not know my son, and they did not know what a father is willing to do. For the first 3 months, I was his hands and his feet. I cooked him meals made from vegetables we grew in our own garden, rich, heavy stews to put the meat back on his bones. I massaged life back into his legs every single night until my own hands ached. I remember the morning the miracle happened. The sun was just coming up over the ridge, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. I was in the kitchen brewing coffee when I heard a floorboard creak. I turned around, expecting to see the wheelchair rolling in. Instead, I saw Nash. He was standing in the doorway, holding onto the frame with one hand. He was wobbling slightly, and sweat was beading on his forehead, but he was standing tall on his own 2 feet. He looked at me and grinned a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "Good morning, Dad," he said. "I think I will take my coffee on the porch today." I wept. I am not ashamed to admit it. I dropped the spoon and hugged him, holding him up as we walked together out into the cool morning air. We are not alone out here. The farm is too big for 2 men to manage, especially with my bad back. We needed a manager, someone we could trust with our livings. There was only one choice. Mitch turned in his brown uniform and his delivery keys the day we closed on the property. He moved his wife and daughter into the guest cottage down by the creek. Now, instead of delivering packages to ungrateful strangers, he drives a tractor. I watch him sometimes working in the fields, teaching Nash how to inspect the fences. They laugh together, loud, hearty laughs that bounce off the hills. Mitch is not just an employee. He is the brother Nash never had, and the second son I never knew I wanted. Yesterday evening, we sat on the porch, swinging on the wooden bench as the sun went down. Nash had a book in his lap and a dog asleep at his feet. He looked healthy. The gray skin was gone, replaced by a tan from the sun. The hollows in his cheeks were filled. He reached over and patted my hand. "We made it." "Dad," he whispered, looking out at the horizon. "We really made it." I looked at him and then out at the fields where Mitch was playing tag with his daughter. "Yes, we did," I said. "We went through hell, son, but we came out the other side. And the view from here is beautiful." The sun began to dip below the tree line, casting a long, shimmering ribbon of orange and purple light across the surface of the lake. We sat at the end of the wooden dock, our legs dangling over the edge, boots hovering just inches above the water. It was quiet here, not the heavy, suffocating silence of the courtroom or the terrifying, lonely silence of that nursing home hallway. This was a living, breathing silence filled with the chirp of crickets and the gentle lap of water against the pilings. I watched Nash cast his line. His movement was fluid and smooth, the tremor in his hands completely gone now. The months of fresh air and hard work on the farm had done more than just heal his body. They had restored his soul. He looked over at me and smiled, a genuine, easy expression, one that reached his eyes. He did not need to say anything. The fact that he was sitting here holding a fishing rod instead of lying in a hospital bed was conversation enough. I looked out at the bobber floating on the glass like surface, and my mind drifted back to the storm we had survived. For 70 years, I believed that family was an unshakable fortress. I believed that the people you welcomed into your home and shared your name with were bound to you by a sacred code. I was wrong. I learned the hardest lesson a father can learn. I learned that a wedding ring does not guarantee a heart. I learned that a shared last name does not promise loyalty. Vanessa had slept in his bed and poisoned his food. Gavin had shaken my hand and plotted my ruin. They were the ones closest to us, and they were the ones holding the knife. But as I sat there in the fading light, I realized I had learned something else too. Something far more important. I learned that while blood might connect us biologically, it is action that connects us spiritually. We were not saved by our relatives. We were saved by strangers who became family, by a delivery driver who remembered a kindness, by a lawyer who hated bullies, by a nurse who risked her job for the truth. I shifted on the wooden planks, feeling the cool evening breeze on my face. I am not the same man I was a year ago. My joints ache a little more and I move a little slower, but my eyes are sharper. I do not take this peace for granted anymore. I watch the horizon not out of fear, but out of duty. I know now that monsters do not always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like angels in silk dresses or friends in expensive suits. So I will always be watching. I will always be the wall standing between my son and the dark. Nash felt a tug on his line and laughed, reeling it in with the excitement of a young boy. I watched him pull a shimmering silver fish from the water, holding it up in the twilight. It was a small victory, but it felt like a triumph. We threw it back, of course. We have had enough of capturing things. We prefer to let them go free. As the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky, I felt a profound sense of gratitude settle in my chest. We had walked through the fire, and we had not burned. We had faced the devil, and we had won. Blood implies a biological obligation, but love is a choice. And looking at my son safe and whole beside me, I knew that true love was the strongest shield of all. I packed up the tackle box and patted Nash on the shoulder. It was time to go home. This story reminds us that the strongest fortresses are not made of stone, but of loyalty and love. We saw that betrayal often comes from those closest to us wearing masks of affection to hide their greed. Yet Bernard showed us that no matter how old or broken you feel, you have the power to fight back when you have something worth fighting for. Money can be stolen, and houses can be sold, but the bond between a father and son is the one asset that cannot be liquidated. In the end, the truth is the only legacy that matters. If Bernard's journey touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel and share this story to spread the message of hope and justice.